Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, Judge. My name is Josephine Lee, and today I will be rereading an excerpt from The Girl with Seven Names by Hyeonseo Lee. From the perspective of a North Korean girl currently named Hyeonseo Lee, the world somehow seems weird to her, as she loves her country throughout her childhood, though she figures out the devastating story of North Korea and its history later in her life. Hyeonseo Lee is a North Korean defector as well as an activist who is willing to make sure people acknowledge the situation that is happening in North Korea. I chose The Girl with Seven Names because it's a powerful story of a young girl and how she fought for what she believed in. Moreover, we dive into the story of how she ended up changing her name 7 times as she journeys throughout her life. We pick up the story of Hyeonseo, or at that time Minyoung, escaping North Korea secretly from her mother and arriving at her relative's house with the help of Mr. An. The road twisted and turned through the Changbai Mountains. We passed sparse villages of squat, tile-roofed houses along the way. They didn't look much different from those in North Korea, but after a few hours' distance, the villages were larger and looked more prosperous. Gradually, they merged into towns and towns into suburbs. The 2-lane road became 4 lanes. Soon the traffic was a broad, slow-moving river of steel and glowing red taillights. We were caught in an ant-like crowd of thousands of cars, more than I have ever seen. Far from being bored, my eyes were everywhere taking this in. Every vehicle looked new. There were none of the heavy green military trucks, the most common vehicles around Hyesan. We stopped for lunch at a service station at the side of the freeway, which had photographs of mountain water dishes displayed in illuminated signs. In North Korea, there were only state-owned restaurants which saw no reason or need to entice customers or make any effort to sell, and private semi-legal ones operating furtively in markets or in people's homes. But here the restaurants were advertising themselves, brightly inviting me to stop and look. I ordered egg fried rice, and the waitress brought a huge plateful. Chinese people eat so much. I looked up at Mr. An. He laughed heartily at my expression. He was enjoying my reactions to everything. We approached Shenyang in the late afternoon along an 8-lane expressway. Nothing had prepared me for my first sight of the city. Huge towers of steel and glass rose on either side, their tips aflame in the last light of the sun. The taxi stopped at the crossing at the lights, turned red, and then hundreds of people crossed the road. Every one of them was dressed differently. No one was in a uniform. I glanced up and saw a soaring billboard of an underwear model. I had not known that Shenyang, the capital of Liaoning province, is one of the largest cities in China. More than 8 million people live there. It made Pyongyang look like a provincial backwater. We reached the neighborhood where my relatives lived, and after stopping several times to ask for directions, found the address. It was in a large, glitzy apartment complex. Each block was 20 stories high. Mr. An and the taxi driver came with me in the elevator up to the 11th floor. I rang the doorbell and felt a flutter of anxiety. I had no idea what to expect. My Uncle Jungle opened the door and looked to me, from Mr. An to the taxi driver. "Uncle, it's me, Minyoung." It took him a second to absorb this, and then his face was agog, like a cartoon character. And Sang-hee joined him in the door. She was as astonished as he was. My uncle was in fact my father's cousin. His family had fled Hyesan during the Korean War, and he had grown up in Shenyang. He had visited us in Hyesan twice, but not for several years. He had seemed wealthy to us, a little plump, very outgoing, and always laden with gifts. He was now in his late 40s. I introduced Mr. An and explained that it was my vacation and I wanted to see China before I started college. My uncle paid the enormous taxi fee, and the driver left. After chatting for a while, Mr. An said that he was going to do some shopping and return to Changbai. We said our goodbyes. My uncle and aunt made me feel instantly welcome. I was family. It made no difference to them that they had not seen me in years. Their apartment was modern and spacious, with small, elegant spotlights set into the ceiling. This was like the homes I seen in the TV dramas. Floor-to-ceiling windows gave sweeping views onto a dozen tall apartment buildings identical to theirs. The sky had turned a deep orange. Lights were coming on in the other towers, making them look like jewel boxes. Beyond them, all the way to the horizon, hundreds more towers glittering in the dusk were being built or hadn't been newly completed. My uncle asked my aunt to pop out and buy some ice cream. She came back with these variety which she could find. "Try these," she said. "Some of them are new." We opened them all and I took a spoonful from each. They were the most heavenly flavors I had ever tasted. Jasmine flavored green tea, mango, black sesame, a luscious fuchsia called taro, and a Japanese one called red bean. Red bean. Flavors I had not imagined possible. Oh, how this made me want to stay in China. My uncle was tall and slimmer than I remembered him. As a girl, I thought he looked plump because I had grown up in a country where there were no fat people. But compared with the large and rounded Chinese people I had seen everywhere, I saw that his face was the boniness of someone who had endured decades of hardship. Wealth for him and had come late in life. I had been so caught up in describing my journey and enjoying the ice cream that we had not yet gone into the subject of family. My uncle asked my father. The spoon had stopped halfway to my mouth. He did not know that my father, his cousin, was dead. When I explained what happened to him, my uncle's mood darkened. How dare they do that to him? He murmured. He pressed me for details. He wanted to know everything about my father's arrest, the charges, the interrogation. I didn't want to talk about this. When I finished, he brooded in silence for several minutes. Then, to my great surprise, he stood up and launched into a tirade against my country. Years of bottled resentment was suddenly on his lips. You know, all the history they teach you at school is a lie? This was his opening shot. He started counting off the felicities I'd been taught. He said that at the end of the Second World War, the Japanese had not been defeated by Kim Il-sung's military genius. They'd been driven by the Soviet Red Army, which had installed Kim Il-sung in power. There had no been revolution. I had never been heard my country being criticized. I thought he'd gone crazy. And they taught you the South started the Korean War, didn't they? Well, here's some for news. It was the North that invaded the South, and Kim Il-sung would have lost badly to the Yankees if China hadn't stepped in to save his arse. Now I knew he'd gone crazy. Thank you.